I had barely turned the key when I saw it my husband, the strongest man I'd ever known, sitting in the worn-out recliner by the fireplace, crying like a child. His shoulders trembled under the thick gray cardigan I had knit him for our 25th anniversary. I blinked, unsure if I was really seeing what I thought I saw. The moment froze, and then, in the next breath, I heard laughter. 10 feet away, through the open archway that led to the dining room, my son David was standing in his neatly pressed navy blazer, holding a champagne glass and laughing with a tall, stylish woman I didn't recognize. She had a sharp bob haircut, wore suede heels despite the chilly November wind, and held her own glass with perfectly manicured fingers. I smiled instinctively, feeling the warmth of familiarity and celebration. "Surprise!" I called out as I stepped inside, shaking off the last bit of cold from the front porch. "Don't tell me I missed a toast." David turned first, his face lighting up with something between joy and confusion. "Mom, what are you doing here already?" "I took the early Greyhound from Milwaukee," I said, setting my overnight bag beside the coat rack. "Figured I'd beat the traffic and surprise y'all. Is this a friend of yours?" The woman turned to face me, her smile sharp but polished. "You must be Mrs. James. I've heard so much about you." I smiled back, stepping closer. "Well, that depends. What exactly have you heard?" David let out a nervous chuckle. "This is Sandra. She's a friend. Just visiting." Sandra extended her hand. Her handshake was firm and cool. "Just catching up on some plans with your son. Beautiful home you have here." "Oh, thank you," I said, glancing over her shoulder to where Raymond was still sitting, unmoving, his hands clutching what looked like a bundle of papers. "Ray, you okay, baby?" He didn't answer. I frowned and stepped closer. His eyes were glassy. Not the tired kind of glassy either, something else. Something deeper. David moved quickly to intercept me. "Dad's just a little tired. We've been going over some stuff planning ahead, you know. Retirement stuff, future-proofing. Nothing serious. My brow knit. "Future-proofing?" "He's just overwhelmed," David said. "And we may have popped the cork a little early. Celebration and all." "Celebration?" I echoed, half laughing. "Did I miss something? Y'all finally picking a date for the wedding?" Sandra and David exchanged a look. The kind of look people give each other when someone says something they weren't supposed to hear. David forced a grin. "No, nothing like that, just sorting things. You know how it is." I walked over to Raymond, slowly. My instincts weren't screaming yet, but something inside me began to stir. Something that told me my husband, this proud, meticulous man, wouldn't be weeping alone in a chair unless something had gone terribly wrong. "Ray," I said softly, crouching beside him. "You okay, hon? You sick?" His lips trembled, but no sound came. He clutched the papers tighter. David stepped behind me. "Mom, let's get you a cup of tea. You've been traveling. Come sit, rest." "All amen." I didn't move. My eyes stayed on Raymond. "What's this?" I asked, reaching toward the papers. David leaned over quickly. "It's nothing. Just legal stuff. Estate planning. Wills. You know how it is." "Doesn't look like nothing," I said, pulling the top sheet gently. My eyes scanned the heading. Durable power of attorney. Full authority. My stomach dropped. Sandra cleared her throat. "This is completely standard, Mrs. James. Many couples your age prepare these. Your son is simply helping facilitate—" "Don't speak to me like I'm a client," I snapped. David's smile was gone now. "Mom, don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I said, slowly rising. "I'm asking why your father is sitting here shaking, with tears in his eyes, holding a document that gives you full control over everything we've built." "It's just precautionary," David said. "We were going to explain—" "No," I cut him off. "You weren't." Raymond let out a soft sob, his voice barely audible. "He said it was just paperwork, that you were on board." I looked back at David. "You told him I agreed to this?" David hesitated. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I said, voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to sign away our home, our life." Sandra took a step back. "I'll wait outside." "Good idea," I said, never taking my eyes off David. The warmth I had walked in with had drained completely. Something in my chest cracked, not just fear, but betrayal. Subtle, Quiet, but deep. David rubbed the back of his neck. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being alert," I said. "Something's wrong with your father and it didn't start this morning." There was silence. Outside, the wind stirred through brittle leaves. Inside, Raymond began to tremble again. My hand touched his shoulder. He flinched. I turned back to David, my voice like ice now. "What did you give him?" David's jaw tightened. "Just something to help him sleep. He's been anxious." "Did he ask for it?" I demanded. No answer. I stepped back. The woman who entered the house 30 minutes ago, cheerful, arms open wide with surprise, was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone who knew without a shadow of a doubt that her son was hiding something. Something big. "I'm going to make a call," I said quietly. "And unless you want things to get ugly, you'd better pray your name is clean." I stood by the kitchen window, watching Sandra's car reverse down the long gravel driveway. Her beige SUV looked far too polished for this old lakeside neighborhood. A dusting of leaves blew past her tires as she sped off, not even glancing back. Good. Let her run. She wouldn't be the last stranger to leave this house uncomfortable, but I sure hoped she'd be the last trying to steal it from us. Behind me, David hovered near the kitchen island, arms crossed tightly, as though he could squeeze the truth into a more favorable shape. He hadn't said a word since I told him I was calling someone. Not the police. At least not yet. I needed clarity. Facts. I wasn't a woman who rushed into things without knowing exactly what I was walking into. Raymond was upstairs, lying down, finally asleep if you could call it that. I made him a cup of chamomile and helped him to bed myself. He barely spoke a word, just clutched my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry," like a child caught stealing candy. And David had the gall to look me in the eye and say everything was standard. "I don't understand why you're reacting this way," he said now, breaking the silence. "We were just trying to make things easier for you." I turned slowly from the window. "Easier? By drugging your father and lying to me about it?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't be dramatic. You said that before," I said. "Next time you say it, I swear to God, David, I'll be the dramatic one you'll never forget." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, maybe we got ahead of ourselves." "You think?" I took a deep breath, grounding myself. "When did this start?" He leaned against the counter, pretending to think. "I don't know. A couple months ago, Dad started forgetting stuff. Bills, keys. I thought maybe he was slipping, so I made a few calls." "To a doctor?" "To a lawyer." My stomach clenched. "You didn't even take him to a proper doctor before getting legal papers drawn up?" He shrugged. "What would be the point? The signs were all there. He trusts me. I figured we could get ahead of it, avoid complications. And I was just supposed to, find out when the house was already sold?" His jaw tightened. "It was never about that. The lake house is a liability. Too old, too much upkeep. We could get good money for it now and put it toward our retirement," I snapped. "Our time together. This was the plan. Your father and I spent our lives building this home, every shingle, every beam. You think that's a liability?" David shifted, clearly impatient. "You and Dad have no idea how complicated things get when health declines. You need someone in charge." I stared at him for a long time. I didn't recognize this version of my son. Not the boy who used to bring me pressed flowers from the yard or stay up late helping Raymond fix the porch railing. This man standing in front of me spoke in legalese and costs and assets, like we were just burdens waiting to be minimized. "I'm going to call Melanie," I said, more to myself than to him. David frowned. "Why?" "Because she's your sister. And she deserves to know what you're up to. She'll just overreact." I gave him a long look. "Good." He sighed, exasperated, then stormed out to the deck, pulling his phone from his pocket. I heard the sliding glass door slam shut behind him. I didn't wait. I went to the den, pulled out the old black notebook I kept for emergencies, and flipped to Melanie's number. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mama," she said, her voice bright. "I was just about to call. You made it to the lake house, okay?" "I did," I said carefully. "But something's wrong, baby. Something's really wrong." Her voice dropped instantly. "What happened?" I filled her in, every word as measured as a metronome. I told her about the papers, the champagne, Sandra, the real estate consultant, and how her father, her big, strong father, had cried in my arms and barely understood what he signed. "I need you here," I said. "I don't trust what I'm seeing, and I need someone besides me to make sense of it." "I'll drive tonight," she said without hesitation. "I'll pack a bag, bring my medical kit too. If he's been drugged, I'll know." I felt a wave of relief. Melanie had always been the steady one. Calm, clear-eyed, never fooled by sentiment. She'd worked ER for 15 years. She could spot dementia, chemical interactions, and deception better than anyone. "Thank you," I whispered. "I just need one person in this house to tell me I'm not crazy." "You're not," she said firmly. "You've always been the one who saw things clearly. I'll be there by midnight." We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, the old rotary clock ticking beside me. In the silence, I heard David pacing outside on the deck, talking fast into his phone. I couldn't catch the words, but I caught the tone, frustrated, panicked. I imagined him telling someone that the plan was unraveling, that I'd shown up too early, that the old woman was being difficult. Let him scramble. Upstairs, Raymond stirred. I walked up the stairs slowly, checking on him. His face was pale, lips dry. I dabbed a cool cloth on his forehead and brushed a hand over his thinning hair. "Melanie's coming," I said softly. "She'll know what to do." He nodded, eyes still closed. "You always knew," he murmured. "You see what I can't." My throat tightened. "You've always seen for me when I couldn't. It's my turn now." He gripped my hand, a weak squeeze, but it said more than any words. Downstairs, I heard the front door open again. David was back inside. The tension would return soon. But not yet. Not while Raymond was still holding on. And I knew then I would fight for him, for our home, for the life we built, even if it meant standing against my own flesh and blood. If you feel connected to this woman's strength and resilience, give her a like. Don't forget to subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Who knows? Maybe someone nearby is listening to the same story with you right now. The morning light that filtered through the lace curtains was the kind of soft gold that usually made me want to put on a jazz record and slow-cook grits. But that morning, the sunlight felt like a cruel joke, warm and beautiful against a house that had grown cold with distrust. I stood in the kitchen in my old blue robe, spooning sugar into a cup of black coffee, listening to Raymond's soft snore upstairs. He had finally slept through the night, which should have brought comfort. It didn't. I heard the floor creak behind me. "You're up early," David said. "I never really went to sleep," I replied without turning. "Old women tend to have things on their minds." He gave a dry chuckle. "Look, Mom, about yesterday." "Save it." I turned to face him, my hand steady on the coffee mug. "Your sister's arriving today. We'll wait until she gets here to talk." David's face changed just slightly, a twitch around the eyes. "You called Melanie?" "Of course I did. She's part of this family. Unlike your real estate friend." He held up his hands. "You don't understand. This isn't some scam, Mom. It's just complicated. I was trying to do the right thing." "No," I said calmly. "You were trying to do the easy thing, and you thought I'd be too tired or too soft to fight back." He opened his mouth, but I stepped closer. "You might have been able to gaslight your father, David. He's old, sick, and he loves you too much to see you clearly, but not me, not anymore." "Oh." He looked at me for a long moment, jaw working, like he wanted to say something ugly but knew better. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said again, this time quieter. "I'm making sure it's as hard as it should be, because betrayal, especially from your own child, should never be easy." He walked away. I stood there a while, watching the steam rise from the coffee cup, listening to the clock ticking above the stove. Then I pulled out the little voice recorder I'd tucked behind the bread box. It had been running since last night, just in case. I pressed stop and slid it into my apron pocket. Melanie arrived just before noon. Her boots crunched across the gravel, and I was out the door before she even knocked. I pulled her into a hug tighter than I meant to. "Hey, Mama," she murmured into my shoulder. "You okay?" "I am now." She pulled back, studying my face the way only daughters can. Then she looked past me toward the house. "Where is he?" "Still upstairs. Slept late. His appetite's gone, Mel." Her face hardened. "Show me what he's been taking." We went inside. I didn't say a word to David, who was pretending to read something on his phone in the living room. He didn't look up. Upstairs, Raymond stirred when Melanie knelt by the bed. "Hey, Daddy," she whispered. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, something like relief passed over his face. "Mel, I'm here, Daddy. You remember me?" He nodded slowly. "Of course I do. My nurse." Melanie smiled sadly. "Not today. Today I'm your daughter." His eyes watered. "I'm sorry. I get confused." Melanie glanced at me, then pulled out a flashlight and gently checked his pupils. "He's groggy, but his responses are decent. Any medications?" I handed her the amber pill bottle David had left in the kitchen drawer. The label was smudged, but Melanie's eyes narrowed the moment she read it. "This dosage is too high," she muttered. "This isn't mild anxiety medication. This is a sedative, strong enough to keep someone barely functional." "Do you think he's been taking it every day?" I asked. Melania nodded grimly. "I'd bet my license on it." We sat with Raymond a while. Melanie asked him gentle questions, writing down his answers, monitoring how long it took him to respond. He knew her name, knew it was November. But when she asked him who the current president was, he blinked and looked panicked. "That's okay," she soothed, patting his hand. "We'll come back to that." Back downstairs, she flipped her notepad shut and exhaled. "This isn't dementia, Mama. This is pharmaceutical fog." I sat down, the weight of confirmation hitting harder than suspicion ever could. He was drugging his own father. "I can't prove intent," Melanie said. "But yes, this was deliberate. You need to get legal help. Fast." I don't even know where to start," I whispered. She pulled out her phone. "I have a friend legal advocate for elder abuse. We'll start there." Suddenly, from the hallway, David appeared. "Abuse?" he snapped. "Are you serious?" Melanie didn't flinch. "Dead serious. You've been sedating our father under the pretense of helping, and you tricked him into signing legal documents. That's not just abuse, it's fraud." His face reddened. "I was doing what needed to be done. You don't know what it's like watching him lose himself." "Then take him to a doctor," she shot back. "Not a notary." "I am a lawyer," he hissed. "And I'm a nurse," she snapped. "But if I gave a patient drugs without consent, I'd be in jail, so buckle up." David looked at me, then back at her. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," I said, rising to stand beside my daughter. "You already made it." He stormed out of the house. Melanie and I stood there in the stillness, the wind knocking gently at the windows. "What do we do now?" I asked. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Now, Mama, we fight." The next morning broke gray and heavy, with clouds sitting low over the lake like damp wool. The air smelled of cold water and pine needles. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, staring out at the thin ice stretching across the shallows. The house behind me was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. Raymond was still sleeping, and Melanie was in the kitchen, typing furiously on her laptop. She had been up half the night, digging into medical and legal records. Every so often I heard her mutter under her breath, "Unbelievable," or, "He really thought no one would check." I wrapped my shawl tighter and tried to breathe. The lake had always been our peace. Raymond and I built this house when we were young and full of faith that good work and honesty could protect us from the ugliness of the world. Standing there, I realized that ugliness doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it comes wearing your child's face. Melanie stepped onto the porch holding her tablet. "You might want to sit for this, Mama." I didn't. "Tell me." She exhaled through her nose. "The doctor listed on the prescription, Dr. Brian Arnett, doesn't exist. The license number printed on the bottle belongs to a veterinarian in Texas." He blinked. "Evict?" She nodded. "Yeah. And the pharmacy? It's not even real. It's a virtual address in Chicago that forwards mail for shell companies. David didn't just find some shady doctor, he created the paperwork himself." I felt my chest tighten. "So he forged everything." "Looks that way. And the sedative, he's been using a generic that's hard to trace. Strong enough to make Dad confused, but not enough to land him in the ER. She lowered her voice. "It's deliberate, Mama. Controlled confusion. Keeps Dad docile so he can manage things." I put my hand to my mouth, tasting the salt of my own tears. My God, my own son. Melanie squeezed my shoulder. "He's panicking now. People do terrible things when they're desperate, but he's not getting away with it." Inside, I heard the creak of the floorboards. Raymond was awake. I went to him while Melanie kept typing. He sat up in bed, his hair mussed, face pale but eyes clearer than they had been in days. "Loretta," he whispered, "I dreamed we were young again. You were laughing in the garden." "We'll laugh again," I said, brushing his cheek. "But right now we've got to stay strong. Melanie's sorting it all out." He frowned. "Where's David?" "Not here," I said carefully. He needed to clear his head. He nodded slowly, maybe understanding more than I thought. He always was good at disappearing when things got messy. Downstairs, the phone rang. Melanie called up. "Mama, it's that lawyer I told you about, Ellen Pierce. She can help." I hurried down the stairs. Ellen's voice was firm, practical, the kind that makes you feel steadier just hearing it. "Mrs. James, your daughter filled me in. I've already reviewed the documents your son had your husband sign. They're invalid, no witness signatures, no notarization. But they look convincing enough to fool a title office if submitted electronically. We need to act before he does." "Tell me what to do," I said. "First, gather evidence bottles, papers, anything with his handwriting. Second, keep your husband somewhere safe. Third," she hesitated, "be careful. If your son's willing to drug his father, he may not respond well when he realizes you're fighting back." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking. "Mel," I said quietly, "we need proof. Something no one can dispute." She nodded and reached into her bag, pulling out a small silver voice recorder. "Already ahead of you. We'll set this under the living room table. Let him talk. He'll incriminate himself without even realizing it." That afternoon, David came back. His car door slammed hard enough to make the windows rattle. He walked in with his jaw clenched, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said. Melanie looked up from the kitchen table. Perfect timing. I moved to the living room, gesturing toward the couch. "Sit." He hesitated, wary, but did. Melanie placed 2 cups of coffee on the table, one near him, one near me, her movements calm but deliberate. Beneath the table, the recorder blinked red. David leaned forward. "I know how this looks," he began, "but you've got to understand I didn't mean to hurt anybody. Dad's getting worse. You're too emotional to make decisions." "Oh." I stared at him, my heart breaking and hardening at the same time. "And that justifies stealing our home?" "I wasn't stealing," his voice cracked. "I was protecting it. You two can barely manage the bills. The roof leaks, the taxes. Do you even know what happens when one of you gets sick for real? You'll lose everything." I was trying to make sure we had options. Melanie's voice was like glass. "You mean make sure you had options?" He shot her a glare. "You think you're so perfect. You left this town the first chance you got. You don't know what it's like dealing with them alone." "I know what it's like to face your problems without drugging people," she said evenly. He froze. His eyes darted between us. "What are you talking about?" "The pills," I said quietly. "The ones you gave your father. The ones from your imaginary doctor." He paled, the color draining from his face. "You don't—" Melanie slid the pill bottle across the table. "We do. You forged prescriptions and tried to make Dad look senile. That's elder abuse, David." He stood suddenly, the chair scraping. "You can't prove any of this." Melanie met his gaze. "Maybe not yet. But we're getting there." He stared at us for a long, tense second, breathing hard. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the coffee cups rattled. When his car roared down the drive, I reached under the table and turned off the recorder. The red light stopped blinking. Melanie exhaled. "Got it all." I looked toward the window, the lake glinting gray beneath the clouds. "He's not my little boy anymore," I whispered. "I don't even know who he is." Melanie squeezed my hand. "Then we make sure the law remembers who you are." By Sunday morning, the air had turned brittle. The lake, once gently rippling and familiar, now sat still and silvered like a polished coin. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I stood in the living room holding a file folder Melanie had printed overnight, legal definitions, documentation checklists, and a list of steps Ellen had sent us for formally revoking any fraudulent power of attorney. The pages felt heavier than paper. They carried weight, truth, responsibility, and something I hadn't felt in a while, resolve. Raymond was sitting up at the kitchen table now. slowly regaining pieces of himself with every hour that passed without David's medication. His color was better, his voice steadier, though he tired easily. Still, when I asked him how he felt this morning, he gave me a smile and said, "More like a man and less like a ghost." That nearly broke me. "I want to do this right," he said. "If we go to court, I want to walk in standing." "You will," I promised, setting a hand on his shoulder. "You won't go through this lying down." Melanie sat beside him, reading through Ellen's morning email updates. "We need a formal statement from both of you, and the doctor needs to see Dad as soon as possible. An official evaluation will help prove he's lucid and competent. We can book someone out of Madison if you're up for it, Dad." He nodded. "Let's do it. I'm tired of being treated like I'm already gone." The front door creaked. I turned sharply, heart leaping. But it wasn't David. It was the mailman, a young fellow named Cal who'd been working this route for a few years. He waved through the window as he dropped off a small stack of envelopes. I opened the door and gave him a polite nod. "Morning, Cal." "Mornin', Mrs. James. Oh, by the way, your son dropped off a big envelope yesterday afternoon after the regular delivery, said it was urgent." My blood cooled. "Did he now?" "Yeah, didn't knock though. Just left it under the mat. Here." He handed me a large manila envelope. I turned it over. No return address. Just our names typed neatly on a label. Raymond and Loretta James. I thanked Cal, closed the door, and brought the envelope into the kitchen. Melanie and Raymond looked up immediately. "He left this yesterday," I said, laying it on the table like a loaded weapon. Melanie opened it carefully, her hands gloved in caution. Inside were printed photographs. Dozens. Pictures of Raymond and me. Old ones, some I didn't even remember being taken. Our house. The lake. Legal documents. Medical bills. Tax records. Everything looked organized. Raymond frowned. "What the hell is this?" Melanie held up a note tucked between two photos. "I was trying to help. If you won't listen to me, at least listen to the numbers. This house will ruin you. You've got 6 months before property taxes double. I paid off the winter heating bill already, but that won't last forever. Don't make me the villain for seeing the future clearly." There was no signature, but we didn't need one. Melanie dropped the letter onto the table. He's trying to justify it all, dress it up as responsibility. I scanned the documents. He had spreadsheets printed out, with expenses highlighted, projections circled in red ink. He was trying to paint himself as the only adult in the room. "This isn't help," I said. "This is a pitch, like we're investors and he's trying to sell us on a hostile takeover." Raymond rubbed his forehead. "He's not stupid. He's calculating. He knew this would hit you where it hurts our fears." Melanie leaned forward. "We use this, all of it. The more he talks, the more he documents, the more evidence we have that he saw what he was doing and still pushed forward." I sat down slowly. "He thinks he's the only one who's seen the future, but he doesn't understand what people like us are made of." "What's that?" Raymond asked. "Steel," I said. "Built under pressure, forged in fire. We didn't survive recessions and layoffs and a miscarriage and 2 decades of secondhand cars just to hand over our dignity at the finish line." Melanie smiled. "Then let's show him." By afternoon we had everything gathered: documents, medical logs, the voice recording from yesterday, and now David's unsolicited dossier. Ellen scheduled us with a mobile eldercare physician to do an evaluation the next morning. If everything held up, we'd have official proof that Raymond had full mental capacity. After that, we'd file a formal report for financial abuse and begin proceedings to revoke David's access to anything he'd tampered with. I made a pot roast for dinner. Melanie insisted we eat something real, not just run on stress. Raymond sat at the head of the table like he always had, and when he carved the roast, his hands barely shook. Afterward, as we were cleaning up, he caught my hand and held it to his lips. "You didn't just save me, Loretta. You saved what's left of who I am." I squeezed his fingers gently. "We'll get through this, Ray, one step at a time." The lights dimmed slightly as the wind picked up outside. Winter was coming hard and fast this year, but we weren't afraid. We were just getting started. The next day started long before the sun came up. Melanie and I were already in the kitchen at 5 a.m., the smell of strong coffee mingling with the wood smoke from the stove. We barely spoke, moving around each other in a rhythm only women who have shared years of quiet struggle can understand. Raymond was still sleeping upstairs, his breath steady, his mind clearer with each passing hour without David's interference. By 8, the mobile physician, Dr. Karen Liu, arrived. She was younger than I expected, early 40s maybe, but she had a no-nonsense presence, the kind of woman who had long since grown immune to excuses and small talk. Her dark coat still had frost clinging to the collar as she stepped inside and gave Raymond a warm but firm handshake. "I hear you've had a rough few weeks," she said. Raymond chuckled dryly. "You could say that. I've been drugged, manipulated, and nearly evicted by my own flesh and blood. But besides that, I'm doing peachy." "Doctor." Lou smiled. "Good. I like honesty. Let's see what else you've got." For the next hour, she ran tests, cognitive questions, physical response, memory exercises. She asked him to name past presidents, recite the months backward, draw a clock with a specific time. Raymond passed each task with quiet determination. His hands still trembled slightly, but his eyes were sharp. "Your mind's fine," Dr. Liu said, jotting notes. "Slower than it once was, sure, but you're competent, lucid, and capable of making your own decisions." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Melanie stood near the fridge, arms crossed, watching carefully. "And the medication?" Dr. Liu nodded. "I reviewed the pills you gave me. It's a sedative often used off-label for control, dangerous when not properly prescribed. Whoever gave that to him wasn't trying to help. They were trying to silence him." Raymond shook his head slowly. "David used to fall asleep on my chest when he was little. I remember the sound of his breathing. Never thought I'd live to see the day he'd want me quiet for good." Dr. Liu gave him a sympathetic look, but didn't offer false comfort. "He didn't just cross a line, Mr. James. He built a road over it. If you choose to report him, there's a case here. Strong one." I reached for Raymond's hand. He nodded at me, then turned to the doctor. "We're not choosing silence anymore." I mull. When she left, Melanie made calls. Within the hour, Ellen emailed us the first draft of a formal statement of financial abuse. We added our own notes, then attached the voice recording and the medical report Dr. Liu had just sent. Everything was falling into place. By late afternoon, I walked outside to get some air. The lake was beginning to freeze at the edges, glassy and thin. I stood on the dock and looked out at the water. That dock had been rebuilt after a tornado, reinforced after 2 floods, just like our marriage. Just like me. I heard the crunch of gravel behind me and turned. Melanie stepped onto the dock, coat zipped to her chin. She stood beside me, hands in her pockets. "I filed it," she said softly. "It's official. The report's in. David will be notified by the end of the week. Once the judge sees the evidence, he'll revoke the POA." I nodded. "And after that?" She was quiet a moment. "Depends on what he does. He'll either lawyer up or try to disappear. Maybe both." "Do you think he regrets it?" I asked. Melanie looked at the water. "He regrets being caught. I don't think he regrets doing it. That's what makes this hard." I swallowed. "I raised him to be better." "You did," she said firmly. "But sometimes people choose the easier path, even if it costs them their soul." We stood there a while longer. The wind bit through my sleeves, but I didn't move. That evening I made my grandmother's chicken and dumplings recipe. Raymond ate 2 bowls. Melanie took photos of the old family cookbook with her phone. For a little while, it almost felt like the old days. Until the knock at the door. Melanie opened it and froze. "David," she said flatly. I stood from the table, napkin in hand, as my son stepped inside. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since the last time he walked out. His eyes went straight to Raymond, then to me. "I got your letter," he said. "The report. The lawyer." I nodded slowly. "We needed to protect ourselves." He looked around, noting the warmth of the room, the meal still steaming, the quiet steadiness of the people he once called home. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. But it did," I said, "because you counted on us being too tired, too kind, or too scared to stop you." He swallowed hard. "Can we talk? Just you and me?" Melanie stepped forward. "No. If you want to talk, you do it in the open. There are no backroom deals here." Raymond, still seated, lifted his head. His voice was low but clear. Sit down, son. Say what you came to say. David hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I'm sorry, he said. I messed up. I thought I was doing what was right, but I see now I was doing what was easiest for me. I got scared. Of the future. Of watching you fade. Raymond met his eyes. You didn't just watch. You tried to erase me before I was gone. David blinked back tears. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, I said, because forgiveness is earned, not expected. He nodded, then stood slowly. I'll cooperate. I won't fight it. As he walked to the door, he turned back. I don't know how to come back from this. I looked at him for a long time. That's not up to me. That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. And then he was gone again. The house fell quiet. Raymond reached across the table and took my hand. Do you think he meant it? He asked. I stared at the door. I think he meant part of it. The rest, time will tell. The next few days passed like a gentle march, slow, deliberate, and filled with the kind of work that keeps your hands busy while your heart catches up. The air grew colder each morning, and frost laced the windows like lacework spun by ghosts. Inside, the house felt heavier and yet safer, like a place recovering from a storm. David hadn't returned. Melanie checked the courthouse records online daily. She confirmed the revocation of the fraudulent power of attorney had been approved. Legally, David no longer had access to any of Raymond's affairs. That single sentence brought more peace than I'd expected. Not joy, not yet, but a certain quiet dignity. Raymond was growing stronger. Off the sedatives, his voice carried more weight, and his sense of humor began to return. He even picked up his crossword puzzle book again, muttering under his breath at clues he used to solve in seconds. I watched him from across the room, my heart aching at the sight of him rebuilding his mind like a man repairing a ship at sea. I remember this one, he said, tapping a box. 4-letter word for betrayal, starts with an S. I looked up from my knitting. Son? He smirked. Too easy. That night, after dinner, Melanie found something in one of the kitchen drawers, a small envelope marked with her name. Inside was a photo of her as a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, sitting on Raymond's shoulders by the lake. On the back, in David's handwriting, were 3 words. I was jealous. She stared at it for a long time. He resented how close I was to Dad, she said finally. Maybe always did. I took the photo from her, running my fingers over the image. Jealousy doesn't excuse cruelty. No, she agreed, but it explains some of it. We didn't speak of David after that. Not much, anyway. Sometimes, when silence stretched long and wide, we'd wonder out loud where he'd gone, whether he meant to repair what he broke. But no one chased after him. We were done chasing. One evening, Melanie came into the den holding her phone. Mama, she said quietly, Ellen wants to know if you'd be willing to speak with a local reporter. Someone doing a story on elder financial abuse, says your case could help others. I hesitated. I wasn't the type to put my pain on display. I'd spent a lifetime fixing things in silence. But then I thought of Raymond, drugged and confused. Of my hands shaking over an envelope I never asked for. Of other women like me, sitting in kitchens across the country, doubting themselves because someone they loved had learned how to weaponize love. I'll do it, I said. A week later, a woman named Rachel Knox came by the house. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a soft smile. She asked permission before recording anything, then simply listened. I told her everything: how I came early to the lake house, how I found Raymond dazed and fragile, how David tried to sell our home out from under us. Melanie added details I couldn't legal terms, timelines, receipts. Rachel never interrupted. She let the story sit in the air between us like steam rising from a kettle. At the end, she put her recorder away and said, "This will help people, Mrs. James. You're not just reclaiming your life, you're building a bridge for others." After she left, I sat on the porch for a long time, wrapped in my thickest quilt. The sky above the lake had turned a deep violet, and the first stars were blinking into view. Raymond joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one, then settled beside me with a groan. "We're survivors, Loretta." "We always were," I said. "But now we're teachers too." He clinked his mug against mine. "To truth." "To truth," I echoed, and we sipped in silence. The story Rachel published appeared in the Sunday paper a week later, just before Thanksgiving. The headline read, "A son's betrayal, a family's strength, one woman's fight against quiet abuse." Our phone rang off the hook for 2 days. Neighbors, old church friends, even strangers from nearby towns called to say they'd seen the article. Some shared their own stories, others just wanted to say thank you. I realized then what happened to us wasn't rare, it was just rarely spoken about. And now, we were speaking. The week after the article was published, our small lakeside town felt different. People waved longer. Grocery clerks smiled a little wider. At the post office, the manager, a quiet woman named Lisa, who'd once been in my book club, touched my hand as she handed me a package. "Your story meant something," she said. "My brother did something similar to my mom 2 years ago. We all stayed quiet. I wish we hadn't." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand for a second longer than usual. Sometimes, presence is the only answer. Melanie had gone back to her life in Chicago, but we spoke daily. Her calls kept me grounded. She promised to return for Christmas, and I promised not to let the house fall apart without her. Raymond and I settled back into a rhythm. Our days were simple crosswords, short walks around the property, bowls of oatmeal, and late afternoon naps with the fireplace crackling in the background. We rarely talked about David now, not because we'd forgotten, but because we knew he had his own journey to face, and it was no longer our job to guide him through it. Then, 3 weeks before Christmas, a letter arrived. It was handwritten on thick, cream-colored paper, the kind you only buy when you're trying to be serious. The return address was a small town in Oregon. Inside were 4 pages carefully written, unhurried, each word carrying weight. It was from David. "Dear Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, then you didn't throw it away. Thank you for that. I don't deserve it, but thank you. I've been staying with an old friend out here. She runs a hospice center. Irony, huh? Turns out I'm spending my days caring for people who have little time left. It's not punishment, it's medicine. Watching them say goodbye, you start to understand what matters. I was wrong. In so many ways I was wrong. I thought I could control life, yours, mine, everything. I mistook fear for responsibility, and I hurt you both more than I can ever repair. I've started seeing a counselor. First time in my life, I told her everything. She said it'll take time. I believe her. This letter isn't asking for forgiveness. It's just a hand reaching out in case you ever feel like reaching back. With all my heart, David. Raymond read it slowly. Then he read it again and again. I watched him closely, unsure of how he would respond. He finally folded the letter neatly, pressed it to his chest and said, "He's trying. Do you believe him?" I asked. He looked out the window, where snow was beginning to fall in gentle spirals. "I believe people can change. But it's not about what I believe, it's about what he becomes." That night, we left the letter on the kitchen table beside the candle we always lit during the holidays, not as a symbol of forgiveness, not yet, but as a sign that we hadn't closed the door. 2 days later, Melanie called. "You got his letter?" she asked. "Yes. Do you want my opinion?" "Always." She sighed. "He's not owed anything. But I've learned something working in medicine. Sometimes the ones who fall the hardest are the ones who needed to be caught the most. I'm not sure we're the ones meant to catch him," I said. "You're not. Not yet. But you're the ones who can show him the way." Christmas came gently that year. No big tree, no glittering lights, just candles, warm cider, and music from the old radio. Raymond gave me a framed photo of us on the dock, taken back in '82. I gave him a leather-bound journal with a note. "Write your side of the story. All of it. It deserves to be told." And tucked into the branches of the tiny pine tree we'd brought in from the edge of the woods, I placed David's letter folded like a star, lit by the smallest string of lights. Some stories don't have clean endings. Some just keep unfolding, quietly, in the spaces between grief and grace. The first week of January came with a quiet calm. No grand resolutions, no parties, just a fresh coat of snow blanketing the world like a sigh. Our little lake house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what this new year would bring. Raymond had taken to writing in the journal I gave him. Every morning after breakfast, he sat by the window, pen in hand, glasses sliding down his nose, his thoughts pouring out in quiet, steady rhythm. I didn't ask to read it. Not yet. Some things need space to become real. One morning, while I was knitting by the fire, he looked up and said, "I started writing about the day David was born." I smiled softly. "Was it a good memory?" "The best," he said. "I want to remember the good things too, not just the end." I nodded. That's the only way the whole story makes sense. Life moved gently. The legal process was still ongoing. Ellen assured us that the state had accepted the evidence and would be monitoring David's financial history for any other suspicious behavior. But so far, no formal charges had been filed. Part of me was disappointed. Another part was relieved. Then, mid-January, a package arrived. No return address, again. Inside was a thick envelope of printed documents and a note. "This is everything. I've closed the real estate account. All properties in your name have been restored. I've spoken to the clerk's office. They have the revocation papers and are processing them. I'm not trying to come home. I'm just trying to make things right. David." Melanie drove in that weekend. She sat at the kitchen table with a highlighter and a legal pad, reading every page. "It checks out," she said. "He really did it. He's backed off everything." Raymond let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "Then I guess that chapter's closed." "Maybe," Melanie said, tapping her pen. "But what about the next one?" I looked at my daughter. She was so much like me in some ways, stubborn, loyal, practical, and yet braver than I'd ever been at her age. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I guess I'm still figuring out what it looks like to live after a storm like that." She smiled. "It looks like this. You, Dad. A warm house. And peace that doesn't feel borrowed." We spent that night playing Scrabble and listening to old gospel records. For the first time in a long while, Raymond won. Fair and square. We laughed so hard my sides ached. But peace, like winter, can be fragile. The next morning, while I was checking the mail, I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull into the driveway. My breath hitched. The door opened, and Sheriff Kate Timmons stepped out. She'd been a friend for years, had coached the girls' softball team when Melanie was in school, but she wasn't here for small talk. "Loretta," she said gently, "I need to speak with you and Raymond." Inside, she laid her hat on the table and folded her hands. "I'm not here to arrest anyone, but we received a call from a woman, Lena Markham. She's the hospice director in Oregon. She's the one David's been staying with." Melanie leaned forward. "What happened?" Kate sighed. "He's checked himself into a rehabilitation center. Apparently, he started drinking heavily after he sent the documents. Got into a pretty serious car accident. No one else was hurt, but he's lucky to be alive." I felt my heart sink, not from anger this time, but something deeper. Pity, fear, that ache only a mother knows. "Is he okay?" I asked. Kate nodded. "Physically, yes. Emotionally, it's going to take time. Lena said he wanted her to call you. He's not asking for anything, just said you should know." Silence settled over the room like a fresh snowfall. Raymond finally spoke. "Thank you, Kate. I'm sleepy." After she left, the three of us sat around the table, the quiet humming with unspoken thoughts. Melanie broke it. "Do you want to go see him?" Raymond looked at me. "Do you?" I didn't answer right away. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the lake. It was frozen solid now, reflecting the pale gray sky. Still, waiting. "I don't know yet," I said, "but maybe the story isn't finished after all." The wind had shifted. You could feel it in the bones of the house, the creaking timbers, the way the curtains lifted slightly, even with the windows closed. The lake, once frozen in silence, now whispered under a layer of melting snow. Something was changing, and I felt it deep in my chest. It had been 3 days since Sheriff Timmons brought us the news. 3 long days of wrestling with old instincts: protect, retreat, forgive, condemn. I'd always believed in second chances, but this wasn't just about giving my son a second chance. It was about what kind of woman I wanted to be after everything had been stripped bare. I sat alone in the den that morning, flipping through photo albums. One of them, an old leather-bound book with peeling corners, was filled with moments I had nearly forgotten. David in overalls, holding a frog. David blowing out birthday candles, his cheeks puffed full of air. David at the lake, with Melanie beside him, both wet from the rain and laughing like nothing could touch them. Grief is strange. Sometimes it's about missing someone who's still alive. Raymond found me there, curled in my chair with the book across my lap. "You thinking of going to Oregon?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I think I need to," I said. "Not for him. For me. I need to see what kind of man he's choosing to become." Raymond nodded. "Then we'll go together." I won. 2 days later, we were on a plane for the first time in years. Melanie booked the tickets, made sure we had everything we needed, and hugged me tight at the terminal. "Take your time," she said, "and don't expect closure. Just expect truth." The flight was quiet. Raymond and I held hands across the middle seat like teenagers. I stared out the window as the land shifted beneath us, fields, mountains, cities. Each one a reminder that the world kept moving, even when your heart stayed in one place. The rehab center sat at the edge of a small town called Silver Creek. It wasn't fancy, just a converted farmhouse surrounded by pine trees and wide sky. But it was clean, warm, and filled with the smell of fresh bread and lavender. A woman with silver-streaked braids met us at the front desk. "You must be the Jameses. I'm Lena." She had kind eyes, the kind that told me she had seen more pain than most, but hadn't let it harden her. "He's in group therapy until 2, she said. "Would you like to sit in the garden, or I can bring you tea?" We chose the garden. It was small, fenced in, and filled with winter-tough herbs. I sat on a wooden bench and watched the steam rise from my tea. My fingers wrapped tightly around the cup as if it might anchor me. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door creaked open, and David stepped out. He looked older, not aged but stripped of whatever armor he'd been wearing before. His face was pale, his eyes clearer, and his shoulders sagged not in defeat but in release. "Hi, Mom." "Dad." His voice cracked. Raymond stood first. He didn't speak, just opened his arms. And to my surprise, David walked into them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. Just a man and his father holding on to what was left. Then he turned to me. I didn't move right away. I studied him, the scar above his eyebrow from when he fell off the bike at 8, the line between his brows when he was thinking too hard, the way his hands fidgeted, the same way mine did when I was nervous. "May I sit?" he asked. I nodded. He lowered himself onto the bench, not too close, not too far, just enough to let me breathe. "I've been sober 27 days, he said, "and I've been thinking about you every one of them." "Ah." I nodded, waiting. "I can't take it back," he said. "Any of it. But I needed to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry." I was scared. I let greed in, and then I let it drive. And when I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't like what I saw. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we'd never said, all the pain and love wrapped into one complicated knot. "I read your letter," I said, "and the one you left Melanie, and the file you sent back. You did the right thing. But that doesn't mean everything is fixed." He nodded. "I know. But you're here," I continued, "and you're trying, and I'm proud of that." His eyes welled. He blinked them back. "Thank you." We sat there for a while, the three of us, not trying to repair the past but simply sitting in the present. Before we left, he walked us to the car. He hugged Raymond again. Then he turned to me. "Can I write you?" he asked. "Just letters. Nothing more unless you want." I looked at him, this boy, this man, this storm we had survived. "Yes," I said. "Letters are a good place to start." As we drove away, the sun dipped low over the trees, casting long golden shadows across the snow. Raymond reached over and took my hand. "Do you feel lighter?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Not whole, not yet, but lighter." The return flight was quiet, but not heavy. Raymond slept most of the way, head resting gently against my shoulder. I watched the clouds drift by outside the window, their slow, endless movement like the way grief softens over time, not erased, but made bearable. David's face lingered in my mind. Not the boy he was, not the man who tried to take everything, but the version sitting on that bench, stripped of excuses, looking for a new way forward. He wasn't healed, but he was trying. That mattered more than I expected. When we landed in Wisconsin, the cold was sharper. The sky was a pale steel gray, and the wind carried the bite of a winter not yet finished. But somehow, it didn't feel so punishing. Melanie picked us up at the airport. Her hug was tight and long. "You saw him?" she asked once we were settled in the car. "We did," I said. "He's not the same, but I don't think he's pretending anymore." She nodded, eyes fixed on the snowy road. "Good. That's something." "Oh." At home, the lake was still frozen, but patches of dark water had started to peek through near the rocks, the first signs of thaw. I watched them from the kitchen window while I reheated soup and listened to Raymond hum an old tune under his breath. That evening, Melanie brought out the journal I'd given Raymond and placed it on the coffee table. "Have you read any of it?" she asked me. I shook my head. "It's his." Raymond looked at me. "Maybe it's ours now." He opened to a marked page and handed it to me. "Start here." I began reading aloud, my voice a little shaky. April 1978. The day Loretta said yes to me. I didn't have a ring yet, just a promise. I told her I'd build her a house with my own 2 hands. She laughed and said, "Just don't forget the plumbing." Melanie laughed softly. June 1984. David's first steps. He walked toward me holding a wooden spoon like a sword. I told Loretta he'd be a knight one day. She said, "Or a chef with terrible aim." Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept reading. November 2024. The day I almost lost everything and the day I started getting it back. My son took what wasn't his. But my wife? She gave me back my name, my voice, my place in this world. I stopped, unable to continue. Raymond reached over and closed the journal gently. "It's not a story of loss," he said. "It's a story of reclaiming." That night, I sat at the table alone and wrote David back. "Dear David, we saw you. We heard you. I can't tell you what comes next. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a path, and we're just at the start of it. But your letter reached me, and your eyes told me the rest. So yes, write. Tell us what you're learning, what you're facing, what you regret. Tell us the truth, even when it's ugly, especially then. We don't need you to be perfect. We just need you to be honest. Love, Mom." I sealed the envelope and left it on the porch mailbox, the one David used to check every afternoon as a boy. 2 days later, the first letter arrived. Handwritten, careful, penmanship I recognized from his teenage years. He talked about group meetings, a book he was reading on rebuilding trust, and the way he cried when a nurse told him her father hadn't spoken to her in 15 years. "I don't want to be that father," he wrote. "I still want to be yours." I read it 3 times, then folded it, pressed it against my lips, and tucked it into the basket by the fireplace. By February, we'd exchanged 6 more letters. In one of them, David included a small photo, him with Lena and 2 other residents at the rehab center. He looked thin, but healthier. There was color in his cheeks and something clearer in his eyes. Something we hadn't seen in a long time. Ope. On a Sunday afternoon, as Raymond napped upstairs and I sat knitting by the fire, Melanie brought me a package. "It's from David," she said. Inside was a book, leather-bound. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "For my family, a story in pieces." I opened it. It was filled with pages from his journal, letters he hadn't sent, reflections, apologies, memories. I held it close, tears falling quietly. "He's building his bridge back," I whispered. Melanie sat beside me and took my hand. "And you're letting him?" March arrived like a whispered apology, with melting icicles and the slow drip of forgiveness. The snowbanks shrank, revealing the bruised earth beneath, and the lake cracked open in long, sighing lines, like something deep inside had finally exhaled. Raymond had taken to his morning walks again, just down the gravel drive and back, steady and slow. Some days I joined him, other times I stayed behind with a cup of tea, watching from the porch, letting the rhythm of our new life settle in. The letters from David kept coming. Every Thursday without fail, a new envelope appeared in the mailbox, always the same cream-colored paper, always addressed in his careful, deliberate handwriting, and each one dug a little deeper. One week, he wrote about shame, how it clung to him like a second skin, how it made him feel like he wasn't worthy of being seen. Another, he wrote about his childhood. Not just the good moments, but the ones that confused him. The times he felt unnoticed, even when we were right there. He wasn't blaming us, just trying to understand where things began to break. I read those letters slowly, sometimes aloud to Raymond, sometimes alone in the quiet of early morning. One evening, as I was setting the table, Raymond came in from the mailbox holding a thicker envelope than usual. "This one feels different," he said. Inside was a folded map and a note. "I've been attending weekly sessions with a group outside the center. They host family visits. No pressure, but if you wanted to see how far I've come, I'd love to show you." At the bottom, a date. Saturday, March 23rd. Melanie came over that weekend to talk it through. We sat around the table, the three of us, the fire casting soft shadows across the floor. "Do you want to go?" she asked. Raymond looked at me. "Only if you do." I stared at the envelope. He's reaching, and I said I'd keep listening. So we packed a bag, just one. We weren't sure if we'd stay more than a day. The center's group therapy hall wasn't fancy, a long room with folding chairs and coffee that tasted like cardboard, but the people were real. Their stories raw. When David stood to speak, he didn't look at us first. He looked at the others in the circle. "My parents are here today," he said, voice even. "They didn't come to save me. They already did that once, years ago. They're here to witness, to see who I'm trying to become." He turned to us then. "I don't expect anything. I just want to stop hiding." Afterward, we sat together on a bench outside the center. The sun was warm, unseasonably so, and the smell of earth waking up was everywhere. David handed me another envelope. "These are all the passwords, account closures, documentation, everything I touched. I want transparency, no secrets." Raymond looked through the papers. "You didn't have to do this." David nodded. "But I did. I don't want to live with hidden things anymore." There was a long pause. Then I reached out and touched his hand, just lightly. "I don't know what comes next," I said, "but I know this is a beginning." He didn't cry. He just nodded, lips pressed tight, like he was holding in a world of emotions that would take years to name. That night, we stayed at a little motel outside town. Nothing fancy, 2 twin beds, and a window that overlooked a gas station. But it felt like a homecoming of sorts. In the morning, I found Raymond in the parking lot, staring at the sunrise. "He's not the boy we lost," he said, "but maybe he's becoming the man we hoped he'd be." I wrapped my arms around him. "And maybe we're becoming the parents who can love him where he is, not where he was." On the drive home, we didn't speak much, just watched the landscape blur past. The land was waking up again. So were we. And somewhere, in a rehab center in Oregon, our son was learning how to be whole. Back home, spring came in slow, hesitant waves. Buds peeked from the old dogwood tree by the porch, and the first robins returned with songs that made the mornings feel softer. It was the kind of season that reminded you things could grow again, even after a bitter freeze. Raymond spent most days on the back deck, writing. His journal had nearly filled, page after page of reflections, memories, and those quiet thoughts he once kept locked behind duty and pride. He'd let me read a few more entries, and I found myself moved by the tenderness in his words. "I used to think strength was silence," he wrote. "Now I think strength is the courage to speak without fear of being unloved." Melanie came by every other weekend, usually with groceries and questions. Always watching, always making sure we weren't slipping into old habits like hiding our pain behind casseroles or polite smiles. And every Thursday, David's letters kept arriving. One Thursday, it was a drawing. A sketch of the lake house from memory, charcoal on thick paper. He got every window right, even the small crack in the third step leading to the porch. At the bottom, in tiny script, he'd written, "Still remembering where I came from." Another Thursday, he enclosed a letter for Melanie. We watched her open it at the table. Her eyes scanned the words quickly, then again more slowly. "He said he wants to talk," she said. "Just me and him, if I'm willing." Raymond raised his eyebrows. "And are you?" She didn't answer right away. "He hurt me too," she finally said. "Not just what he did to you both, but how he dismissed me, belittled me, made me feel like my voice didn't matter. That doesn't go away easily." "No," I said. "It doesn't. But," she added, "I also know I'd rather say my truth to his face than carry it like a stone in my chest." So she called him. I stood at the kitchen sink, pretending not to listen while she spoke on the porch. The conversation was quiet, tense at moments. But when she came back in, her shoulders looked lighter. "I said what I needed," she said. He listened. "That's something," I whispered. And then, almost casually, she added, "He's coming back, just for a visit, next month, supervised." The words hung in the air like the smell of rain, fresh but not quite clean yet. "He said he wants to apologize in person," Melanie said. "Not to fix things, just to face them." Raymond leaned forward, folding his hands. "Do we want that?" I met his eyes. "I think we need it, whether we know it or not." The next few weeks passed quickly. I cleaned more than usual, reorganized drawers, polished windows that hadn't been touched in years. Not for show, for clarity, for myself. The day David arrived, the air was cool and sharp. He didn't come alone. A social worker from the center came with him. "Just in case. It wasn't for our safety," she explained. It was for David's accountability. He stepped out of the car wearing a plain button-down shirt and slacks, his hair neatly cut, his face thinner but no longer hollow. He looked human. Not broken, not triumphant. Just real. I met him at the porch. No embrace, no rush, just two people who shared history and hurt. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, David." Raymond stood just inside the doorway. David paused before stepping in, as if waiting for permission. "You don't need to knock," Raymond said. "But you do need to tread carefully." "I know," David nodded. "I will." We sat in the den, the same room where I once found the papers that nearly ended our peace. This time, there were no lies hidden in drawers. Just 4 chairs, 2 mugs of tea, and the weight of everything unspoken. "I want to thank you both," David began, "not just for allowing me here, but for letting me tell the truth without demanding an outcome." Raymond nodded once. "Go ahead." David turned to me. "I don't expect to be forgiven. I've spent every day thinking about what I did. I used your trust like a weapon, and I hurt you in ways I'll never fully understand." He turned to Melanie. "And you. I dismissed you, made you feel small. That was my own insecurity. You were always the strong one, and I resented that." Melanie's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. David continued, "I want you to know every asset has been returned, every account closed. I've also requested to make monthly contributions back to the estate, even if it takes the rest of my life." Raymond shook his head. "We don't want your money." "I know," David said. "It's not about money. It's about doing the hard things, even if they don't change the past." He pulled out a letter from his pocket. "This is a list of everyone I've wronged. You're at the top. I carry it with me to every group. I read it aloud once a week, not as punishment, as a reminder." For the first time in months, I felt something shift in my chest. Not trust, not yet. But maybe. Possibility. "I don't know what role I'll play in your lives moving forward," David said, standing. "But I'll accept whatever boundaries you set. I just needed to say these words with my own voice." He turned to leave. "David," I said. He paused. "Thank you for not asking us to forget. Only to see." He nodded, his voice low. "That's all I ever wanted." After he left, Raymond sat back and let out a long breath. "Well," Melanie stood. "That was something." "And I?" I went into the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of tea, and sat by the window. The thaw had finally reached the lake. The lake was fully open now, its icy crust had finally surrendered to the gentle insistence of spring. Ripples danced across the surface, catching the light in ways I hadn't seen in months. Something about it felt symbolic. Like the house, like our family, like my heart. Melanie stayed for a few days after David's visit. We didn't talk much about it, not at first. The silence wasn't avoidance, it was processing, letting the emotions settle like silt after a storm. On her last night with us, we sat on the porch with 2 blankets and a thermos of hot cider. "I didn't think he'd come," she said quietly. "I didn't think I'd let him in," I replied. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "He's still him, but he's not the same." "That's the part I'm holding on to," I whispered. "That change is possible. Not guaranteed, not clean, but possible." After she left, life settled back into a rhythm. Raymond kept writing, though I noticed the entries became less about the past and more about now what the sky looked like at dawn, how the fireplace crackled differently after a rain, the way I hummed old hymns without realizing it. We'd become gentle people, he and I, weathered but not hardened. And maybe that was a kind of grace. David's next letter arrived just before Easter. Inside, a photo. Him, standing next to a small tree he'd planted at the center. On the back he'd written, "For the parts of me that need new roots." I placed the photo in the wooden frame beside our wedding picture. Raymond noticed, but didn't comment. He just reached over and gave my hand a squeeze. "I think I'm ready," he said later that afternoon. "For what?" "To write my letter to him." "Oh." He disappeared into the den and returned an hour later, envelope in hand. "Would you like to read it?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. Inside was a single page, written in Raymond's crisp handwriting. "Dear David, I've spent a long time building things, houses, fences, relationships. I know the difference between strong foundations and ones that rot from within. What you did shook everything we'd built. Not just the finances, but the belief I had in who you were. But I also know this, people aren't wood or nails. They're flesh, spirit, and choice. They can rebuild. I don't forgive easily. That's something I'm still working on, but I do believe in trying. So keep showing up, keep being honest. That's how we start again. Dad." It was a quiet kind of letter. No grand declarations, just a steady bridge between two distant shores. We mailed it the next day. That Sunday, the church was fuller than usual. Folks were dusting off their spring suits and hats. I hadn't sung in the choir in years, but when Mrs. Connors called to ask if I'd help with the Easter hymns, I said yes without hesitation. Standing at the front of the church, surrounded by voices old and new, I felt something loosen inside me. A note I thought I'd lost rose in my throat and met the others in perfect harmony. After service, people stopped me, some to offer kind words about David's story, others to share their own. One man, Mr. Harold Dillard, whose son had battled addiction, simply said, "It's never too late to walk each other home." The next week, another letter arrived. This one different. Shorter. "Dear Mom," I cried reading Dad's letter. It felt like a gate opening. Not wide, but enough to see through. "I want to keep earning whatever space you both are willing to give. Also, I've enrolled in a community college program here, social work. I want to help people like me. If I graduate, I hope you'll be there. Love always. David." I placed that letter beside the others, tucked into a drawer I now called the Drawer of Beginnings. Later that evening, Raymond asked, "Do you think we'll ever be whole again?" I thought about it, about wholeness, about how much we had lost and how much we still carried. "I don't think wholeness is the goal," I said. "I think truth is, and love, and the courage to hold both at the same time." He nodded, and we sat there, hand in hand, as twilight settled over the lake, imperfect, but somehow enough. May arrived with a full-bloom apple blossoms dusted the driveway, and the air smelled of cut grass and lilac. Raymond called it healing season, though he never said it out loud in front of anyone but me. David's letters were still arriving, each one steady like the heartbeat of someone waking from a long, cold slumber. His words no longer sounded like someone seeking redemption. They read like a man laying bricks beneath his own feet, building something real. The morning of May 14th, I received a call I hadn't expected. "Mrs. James?" a woman said, her voice warm but hesitant. "This is Marlene. I work with the County Adult Education Office. I'm one of David's professors." I froze. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, yes," she chuckled softly. "He's just, well, he talks about you often in class. Wrote his midterm paper about forgiveness and what it means to come home, even if the door isn't wide open yet. I just wanted you to know, his work is good. Thought you might want to hear that." I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat in the kitchen holding the receiver like it still had something left to say. That afternoon, I walked down to the dock. It had been too long. The boards creaked under my feet, familiar and forgiving. I sat at the end, feet dangling just above the water, and let myself remember David at 6, running barefoot across the yard. David at 10, fishing off this very dock, asking questions about the stars. David at 16, angry and sullen, yelling things he couldn't take back. And David at 39, standing in my living room, shattering what trust was left. But now, David at 42, writing letters, telling truths, planting trees. That night, I told Raymond about the call. He didn't say much. Just leaned over, kissed the top of my hand and said, "He's still our son, always was." A week later, another letter arrived, but this one came with a small, unexpected request. "Dear Mom and Dad, next month marks my 60 days. At the center, that's a milestone. We hold a little ceremony, nothing big, just a chance to speak, reflect, and be witnessed. I'd like you both to come. Not to celebrate me, but to stand with me as I try to become someone worthy of your love again. Only if you want to. David." Raymond read the letter and let out a deep sigh. 60 days, he murmured. "Feels like longer. Feels like we've lived a decade in the past year," I replied. We didn't decide right away. We waited a few days. Let the idea settle in the corners of the house like the first scent of summer. On the third morning, I woke early and found Raymond already dressed, thermos in hand. "I think we should go," he said simply. "If he's strong enough to ask, we should be strong enough to answer." So we packed again, this time not with hesitation, but with quiet resolve. The center was, as we remembered, simple, surrounded by trees, and blooming now with color. Tulips lined the walkways, and the wind carried the scent of lemon balm and mint. Inside the meeting hall, the seats were full, families, counselors, residents. The air buzzed with nerves and cautious hope. David stood at the front, wearing a blue sweater we hadn't seen before, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "My name is David," he began, "and today I'm not just here to talk about sobriety. I'm here to talk about truth." He spoke of his past, the lies he told, the harm he caused not just to us, but to himself. "I stole more than money," he said. "I stole safety. I stole time. I stole the version of me my parents believed in." Then he paused, looking directly at us. "But they showed up. Not just today, but every day they chose not to hate me. Every day they read my letters. Every day they let the door stay unlocked, even if it wasn't open." The room was silent, not even a cough. David took a breath, his voice cracking just slightly. "I don't know where this road ends. I just know I'm not walking it alone anymore." He stepped down to applause, some polite, some full of tears. After the ceremony, we stood together outside. The sun was high, casting warm light across his face. For the first time in years, I saw my son without the fog of anger, guilt, or shame. "Just David. Thank you for coming," he said, barely above a whisper. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind his ear like I used to when he was a boy. "Keep walking," I said. "We'll be watching." He nodded, eyes shining. Raymond extended his hand. "No promises," he said, "but you've got my attention." David took it, and they shook. A firm, real handshake. As we drove home, the road felt shorter. We didn't speak of the future, or even of the past. We just drove, windows down, letting the warm air tangle our hair. The lake was waiting when we returned, rippling gently in the early summer breeze. And in the mailbox, as if on cue, another letter. The letter was thinner than the others, just one page, no sketch, no extra note tucked in, but the handwriting was confident, almost firm. I opened it on the porch, still standing, the wood warm beneath my feet from the afternoon Sunday. "Dear Mom, I saw a photograph today in the group room, an old woman standing in front of her childhood home. The house was falling apart, but she was smiling. I asked why. She said, 'Because I'm still here.' I thought of you. You've always been the strong one. You've been standing in front of broken things for years, still smiling. I think I finally understand what that kind of strength costs. I hope one day I can carry some of it too. Love, David." I stood there for a while after reading it, the breeze tugging gently at my sleeves, the birds chirping as if the world had no idea how broken and beautiful life could be at once. Raymond came out with a glass of lemonade, handed it to me without a word, and sat beside me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I think I am." "Ud." That evening, I placed David's newest letter in the cedar box by the fireplace, the one Melanie had labeled "Letters That Matter." I added a label of my own to the side, "Our Second Beginning." Summer unfolded slowly after that. It wasn't filled with dramatic change. There were no reunions or declarations, just the steady rhythm of a family figuring out how to breathe again. David's social worker called in early June to say he'd completed his first course at the community college, got an A. He wanted to send us the paper he wrote titled The Cost of Silence. Raymond read it first. I found him in the den after midnight, still holding the pages, eyes wet. "It's good," he said. "It hurts, but it's honest." We sent David a framed photo of the lake that week. Raymond wrote on the back, "We're still here. Keep going." In mid-July, Melanie invited us to a small dinner at her place. Just her, us, and a couple from church. Casual. But when we arrived, there was one more seat at the table than usual. "I asked David," she said quietly, "if he wanted to come." My breath caught. "Is he?" "He's nervous," she said. "But he's parking the car." I turned toward the window just in time to see him stepping out. He was holding a pie. Store-bought, but in both hands, like it was precious. He stood at the door for a moment, then knocked soft, hesitant. Melanie opened it. "Come in, David." And just like that, he did. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. No confessions, no tears, just conversation. Small stories. Laughter that felt a little stiff at first, then loosened with each passing course. At one point, David asked Raymond about his latest project. They talked about lumber, about tools, about a shed Raymond wanted to rebuild before fall. "I'd like to help," David offered. Raymond didn't say anything at first, then he nodded once. "We'll start next Saturday." That moment, it wasn't grand, it wasn't meant to be, but it felt like someone had opened a door that had been jammed shut for years. After dessert, David stayed behind to help with dishes. It was just the two of us in the kitchen, warm water running, the night hum of cicadas outside. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For this. For not giving up. For standing in front of a broken house and still smiling." I looked at him, this man who had shattered so much, and was still standing. "I'm not smiling because it's easy," I said. "I'm smiling because I'm still here, and so are you." He nodded, eyes glassy, and went back to drying the dishes. When Raymond and I returned home that night, the moon hung low over the lake, casting a silver path across the water. We stood there in silence, watching. "Do you think it'll last?" I asked. Raymond took my hand. "It doesn't have to. It just has to matter." And in that moment, under that wide, forgiving sky, I believed it did. By late July, the air had thickened with the scent of cut grass, rain-dampened earth, and blooming honeysuckle. The kind of summer that made you remember your childhood screen doors creaking, lemonade sweating on wooden tables, cicadas humming like an old lullaby. David came every Saturday. At first, just for the shed. He'd arrive early, before the sun got too high, his sleeves rolled up and a notebook in his back pocket filled with sketches and notes. Raymond handed him tools without commentary, and David worked silently, measuring twice, cutting once. But each week something shifted, small gestures, shared coffee, a few words here and there. One morning, as I brought out a tray of sandwiches, I heard them laughing. Not loud or wild, just a quiet, natural chuckle from Raymond, followed by David saying, "I still don't know how you balance that beam with just a hammer and a prayer." "Oh?" "It was your mother's glare that kept it upright," Raymond said, grinning. I stopped at the screen door, watching them, just for a moment. It was the first time in years I saw my husband and son, not as opposites, but as pieces of a whole, trying to remember how to fit together. After lunch, David stayed behind while Raymond returned to his journal. We sat on the porch, a pitcher of sweet tea between us. The breeze was gentle, the kind that carries old memories like loose photographs in the wind. "I passed the 60-day mark," he said. "Now I'm at 75. I nodded. "That's good." He paused. "I'm applying for a part-time job at a shelter near the college, helping people find housing." "Sounds like important work." "It is," he said. "And I think I need to do something that isn't about me." We sat in silence a while longer. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made this," he said, "with scraps from the shed project." He handed it to me, and I opened the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a note, for the things I broke and the hands that held me anyway. My throat tightened, and I closed the box carefully, holding it to my chest. Later that evening, after David left, Raymond and I sat by the fireplace, though we didn't light it. Summer had made the house warm enough. Still, it was our place to reflect. He's building something, I said. Yes, Raymond replied, and this time it's not a lie. August came with a softness I hadn't expected. No sharp reminders, no sudden breakdowns, just the slow, careful tending of new roots. Melanie called one afternoon. He asked me to join him at a meeting, she said. Not as a family member, as a friend. Will you go? She hesitated. Yes, I think I will. That night, I baked a peach pie. The recipe was one David had loved as a boy, though he'd always scraped off the crust. When he visited that weekend, I served it without mentioning the memory. He took one bite and smiled. You remembered. I remember more than I forget, I said, even if some of it still hurts. He nodded. I'm learning that remembering isn't always about pain. Sometimes it's about finding the way back. That weekend, as he packed up his tools, Raymond walked over and handed him a small key. What's this? David asked. It's the side shed, Raymond replied. It's got your old fishing gear, some things you left behind. David held the key like it was made of glass. Thank you. You earned it, Raymond said, turning back toward the house. On Sunday morning, David left earlier than usual. Before going, he stopped by the kitchen door. I'll be back next week, he said. I'd like to bring someone, just a friend. Of course, I said. The table's big enough. Oh. After he left, I stood at the sink, washing peaches for another pie, the sunlight streaming through the window in thick golden lines. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him falling again. Not of my heart breaking again. Because this time, if he stumbled, he'd know how to stand. September rolled in like an old hymn, familiar, steady, tinged with the melancholy sweetness of endings. The trees began to whisper hints of gold and red, the lake mirrored the sky with a new stillness, and I found myself taking longer walks each morning, just to listen. To let the air tell me what it meant to begin again. David arrived that Saturday with someone by his side. A woman, late 30s, calm eyes, soft voice. Her name was Teresa. She worked at the shelter he'd mentioned. She didn't wear makeup, but she wore something else, certainty, the kind you can't fake. The kind that says, I've lived through fire and didn't turn to ash. We had lunch on the porch. Teresa was kind, but didn't force conversation. She laughed when David made dry jokes, and she listened more than she spoke. I liked her immediately. After they left, Raymond turned to me and said, She's been through something. You can see it. Yes, I said. And she's not afraid of his past. That matters. That night, I sat alone in the den and pulled out David's first letter again. The one with the trembling handwriting, the one that said, I don't know if this will ever be enough. It felt like a lifetime ago. Because now, he was showing up. Not as a man trying to erase his mistakes, but as one willing to carry them honestly. A week later, we received an invitation. David James Cordell. Request the honor of your presence. At his graduation ceremony. Community Renewal Center. Saturday, October 7th. 2 p.m. Raymond stood by the window rereading it. He wants us there. Of course he does. We're going, he said. It wasn't a question. That Saturday, we dressed in quiet reverence. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to his high school graduation, though it fit a little differently now, looser in the waist, snug at the shoulders. Life had reshaped me. When we arrived, David was already seated near the front, Teresa by his side. He stood when he saw us, his smile, small but real. The ceremony was humble. No fanfare, no orchestra, just folding chairs, handwritten programs, and a podium decorated with sunflowers from the community garden. One by one, graduates stood and spoke. Some cried, some laughed. All of them carried stories that trembled in the air like fragile wings learning to fly. When David stood, the room quieted. My name is David, he began, and I used to believe that redemption was something you had to earn all at once, that if you couldn't fix everything, you couldn't fix anything. But I was wrong. I know. He looked directly at us. I've come to understand that healing isn't a destination. It's a series of small, honest choices. Letters written, apologies made, trust rebuilt, not demanded. And today isn't the end. It's just another promise I intend to keep. When the ceremony ended, he walked over to us, diploma in hand. I know this doesn't undo the past, he said. It's not supposed to. I replied. It's meant to build what comes next. Ugh. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. What's this? David asked. Keys, Raymond said, to the upstairs guest room at the lake house, in case you ever need a place to write or rest. David looked down, speechless. Teresa reached for his hand. That evening, back at home, the sky burned orange over the lake, and I stood at the water's edge barefoot, letting the cold ripple around my toes. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet thank you. To no one in particular. Maybe to time, maybe to God, maybe to the stubborn hope that refused to die. Raymond came and stood beside me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Behind us, the porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow across the yard. Inside, dinner waited. And for the first time in what felt like years, so did peace.